Welcome, and thank you all for joining us for the KPI Peer Network. We're really excited. Today we're going to hear from Susan Ramsey on engaging leadership and performance management and quality improvement, as well as get a sneak peek at ASTO's performance dashboard indicators. Again, welcome to everyone that's joined us. And with that, I'm excited to introduce Susan Ramsey, who I feel like with this group might not need much of an introduction, but Susan is a dear friend of ASTO. We've been working with her for a while, and she is with Pearls of Wisdom Consulting. And Susan is going to be presenting on engaging leadership and performance management and quality improvement today. And she has a lot of really great information to share, and again, she really needs no introduction, but we'll quickly share a little bit and brag a little bit about her. But Susan has more than 25 years of public service work for the state of Washington, and she actually helped them achieve accreditation, one of the first states. She is a past co-chair for the Standards and Accreditation Work Group for the Public Health Improvement Partnership in Washington State, representing the state as well as 35 local health departments. She's a trainer and presenter on performance management, quality and strategic planning, accreditation, and works with, again, ASTO, FAB, NNPHI, and Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. She is on the Public Health Accreditation Board, or she's a Public Health Accreditation Board site reviewer, as well as a Malcolm Baldridge site reviewer, and a member of the FAB Evaluation and Quality Improvement Committee. And I think you'll she's definitely more than qualified to share this information with us, and so excited to hear her strategies for how folks can engage leadership in performance management and quality improvement efforts to create a culture of quality. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it all over to Susan. Oh, Susan, are you there?
I am, just checking to make sure everybody can hear me.
Yes, loud and clear. Thank you.
Perfect, perfect. Let me get my slides advancing. I'm not advancing yet.
Oh, and Susan, I'm happy to advance them for you. See if you want to go ahead and.
Is that better? Let's see here. I apologize for the delay. I'm not sure if you're moving me or if I'm moving me, Jamie.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and advance it for you, Susan.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the help. I'm not sure why I'm not moving, but that's all right. So thank you so much. I'm excited. This is performance management, quality improvement has been something that I've been doing in over 30 years of providing support to organizations at nearly every stage of performance management and quality improvement. Leadership certainly has consistently emerged as probably the single most important determinant of success. And so those organizations with deep leadership engagement soar, and of course, while those who don't fail to really experience significant transformation. So this is a topic that I'm excited to talk about today. The next slide, Jamie. Thank you. So what I want to share is my way of thinking about components of performance management and quality improvement. And I've got a slide that I'm going to talk about where I map out foundational core values, mindsets, and practices that leaders need to have to adopt to support the PMQI journey. And what you can do as a consultant internally to get a mindset and practices. And of the people on the webinar, I can see that most of you are consultants internally around improvement efforts. And I know some of you have a full-time role around this, and others part-time at least, but this is really a topic where kind of getting the lay of the land might help you. But I want to speak to both groups, if there are leaders in the call as well as those that are consulting internally. Next slide. It is a slow here. So I'm specifically going to talk about some of those core values for performance management QI. And without these core values, you're not going to get much traction, and leaders won't be modeling behaviors to have a really efficient PMQI organization. And I think throughout the presentation, I think I'll stop saying the whole words performance management, quality improvement, and use the PMQI acronyms if that's okay with everybody. I want to talk also about key performance indicators and visual management and go and see leadership, or Gemba. Those of you who aren't familiar with the term Gemba, it's a Japanese word meaning go to where the work is done. And finally, I'm going to talk about the one don't in the PMQI leadership role. Next slide, Jamie. So for those of you who have read John C. Maxwell's work, he places the leader in the core of the business. Everything rises and falls on leadership. And when I started many years ago with total quality management, and some of you might know that, have been around a long time and have gray hair like me, as TQM. And I believed you could grow back then from the base roots or even in the middle of an organization. And I've now grown to believe that it starts with the people at the top. And everything does rise and fall on leadership and how leaders are acting, behaving, or messaging across the organization. And if you're in the middle or a QI/PM consulting role and you don't have that uppermost leadership support, it doesn't mean you can't achieve a lot. But it does probably mean, though, that you're never going to have a large scale of performance consistently across the agency. And you will have pockets of excellence and good performance. And I've seen that throughout the folks that I consult with. And I'm not saying that you should throw in the hat, but it does mean you might want to change some of your approach and possibly scale back your expectations on what you can achieve and how fast you can achieve it. Next slide. So the next question that comes to mind for me is if we need to develop strong leaders, or are leaders born? And what I mean by that is, do they come out of the womb with strong leadership skills, or is it a more nature or nurture type of thing? So can leaders be developed? Absolutely. I'm learning that they can be. Things like leaders having coaches and mentors or belonging to reading groups and those kinds of activities. These are all ways that leaders can become better. And if you're an internal personal consultant working with leadership teams, it starts with a conversation with them about what PMQI leadership looks like. So how do we do that? Be specific about, clear on what your ask is, and start showing leaders a different way of behaving. Let them experience the benefits of behaving that way and what's in it for them, and that's the quickest way to get to the new way of behaving in an organization. Next slide. Now I know you're all, because I see a lot of familiar names here on the participant list, familiar with this model here, but when you look across PMQI, it's been fascinating to me about how many people think of PMQI in a pretty narrowly and very superficial way. There is so much to PMQI management. There are a lot of people who have read one book on PMQI and one book that focuses on probably one element or they began back in early 2000, and back then, people were only talking about the tools and not talking about the supporting infrastructure that is necessary for the tools to do their job. I'm very fortunate to be on the team for the update of the Turning Point model that you see here in 2012. And what the update did, it added that outermost circle, which is your visible leadership, the transparency, strategic alignment, culture of quality, and customer focus. And when I think of the kind of development or supporting infrastructure of PMQI that is needed to become this highly PMQI functioning organization, I think of 4 elements. And at the first and foremost, you have to develop PMQI thinkers across the agency. Every single person in the agency has to have this thinking about what PMQI is. And second, you have to have PMQI management practices that you're going to learn a little bit about today. I'm going to share some, and I know many of you are pretty savvy in this area, but you have to manage the agency in different ways. And then third is the PMQI processes. It's what we focused on for a long time in PMQI, almost in exclusion of the other areas of PMQI. Processes is a little more of the technical or mechanical part of what makes PMQI successful. It's no less important, but it's only one element of what PMQI is really about. And the fourth, final thing is PMQI leadership. They need to be PMQI thinkers themselves, understand the PMQI fundamental process, and they need to be practicing in a PMQI way. They have the added responsibility of being the responsible party of where is true north, and focusing on what matters and sharing the vision and all of those things that are a leadership responsibility. I believe that these 4 key areas become a jigsaw puzzle, and they're not really a linear jigsaw puzzle. And so when you think of those high performers, each piece of that PMQI principles, practices, and tools, each of those elements kind of butts up to and connects with another element of PMQI. They definitely cannot be taken in a silo and do much by themselves. They require that interconnection with other elements. Next slide. And actually I'm going to just move us to that after that one, because this is just kind of an intro to, now let's start digging into PM and QI. So this one, perfect. Thank you so much, Ms. Jamie. So don't freak out when you look at this. This is an eye chart that'll make your eyes hurt. But I was seeing a lot of people not grasping the full realm of what makes PMQI, right? So I wanted to take this actual work that we do in PMQI, and in the center you see this triangle, and that's kind of trying to show 3 different categories. One of them is the management practices themselves, which is shown on the left, and you can see the bulleted items shown on the left that go with that portion of the triangle. The other is the process design, which is shown on the right. That's the technical part of it. And at the core of all of that, at the bottom, is the core values or principles and philosophy that make PMQI so wickedly effective and have not been some of those predominant philosophies that I've seen in previous approaches. So what I'm going to do is handpick some of these management practices and core values to kind of focus in on today, because as you can see, there's so many of these bullets that I could pick and choose and talk about, but I'm just going to handpick a few for the webinar today. Next slide, Jeannie. So let's take a look at the kinds of development that you need to do. And let's break that down through the whole workforce. And my buckets that I create, there's this executive leadership bucket, middle managers, frontline staff, and internal PMQI council consultants or team. So those executives and leaders, what do they need to know? A little bit of everything. But they really need to focus on those mindsets, core values, and model that. The Gemba-Based Leadership that I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail. And then this PDSA problem solving, which we're very familiar with and many of you on the phone are. That strategy deployment and key performance indicators that I'm going to dig in a little further into too. And then when I move down that scale to middle managers, they need all of that and a very strong process management capabilities and this high level of proficiency in that area. And then when I move to the next level around frontline staff, they need to focus on primarily waste identification and this daily Kaizen component. And for those of you on the phone who aren't familiar with Kaizen, that's another Japanese term meaning this philosophy of continuous improvement on working of practices. And it's related to waste identification. And then, of course, all of you who are on the phone, my favorite group, the internal PMQI Consultant Council, they have the biggest load of everybody to carry because they have to know all of the above, and they also need to be advanced with the QI analysis tools and countermeasures. And they also need to have a certain type of disposition. And I've met many of you, and I know you have it, and it's this certain level of knowing how the business operates and being savvy around human psychology. Excuse me. And what it takes for effective change and what it takes to practice these PMQI behaviors. And so the heaviest lifting does come from the internal PMQI consultant or council or team, even though you need the greatest support from the top. Next slide, Jamie. So let's look at that first 3 core values, principle, and philosophy there at the bottom, and I've got it highlighted in red on the slide, which are very related, the humility, respect, and curiosity. One of the things that I've learned over many years in studying Toyota and Deming and other researchers is that there's a whole lot more to how they think and behave that has to do with humility, respect, and curiosity than I believe anyone who's been in this field for any length of time imagined in the beginning. Let's go to the next slide. So one thing that I see is leaders bringing into the PMQI realm and how they lead is sometimes a little too much ego, if you will. And I know a couple of you are probably laughing right now, but this is what I'm seeing. And when you think about who makes it into the leadership ranks, this isn't all that unusual. You see these very high-performing people making their way into those ranks. They are able to think quickly, make decisions, which are the very traits that get you into that leadership role. However, once they're there, they have to check that at the door, which is really often very difficult for them to do. And leaders need to move into this realm of not knowing and being comfortable in not knowing and help everyone else in the agency to be comfortable in not knowing and start to demonstrate this robust problem solving and not thinking that they know the answer and not thinking that they know the root cause, and not assuming that data exists, and not assuming that the data is telling you something, and oftentimes when nobody's even gathered the data to tell anything. Next slide. So it's really important to make sure that everything is coming from a place of fact. It is fact-based decision-making. Make sure that you're helping people recognize that they are operating from assumptions and catching yourselves that you are operating from assumptions or innuendos and half-truths, and make sure that you are in every step of the way using facts and data to make decisions and define priorities. And this is one of the human behavior elements that makes PMQI successful. Having everyone in the organization get sensitized to fact-based decision-making, fact-based prioritization, fact-based analysis, and basically developing this what I would call this intolerance to anything but a fact-based conversation. And you can do that very subtly by asking people, well, why do you think that way? And what led you to that conclusion? And you start training your mind to be far more specific and start using facts. Next slide. So the other thing that I see is people embracing the question why, right? So, and that's no problem. Everyone understands, I believe, the power of why. But it's the way that leaders ask why that can make or break this whole PMQI cycle. What we hear a lot is this accusatory and blaming way of asking why versus why out of curiosity. So right along with humility is almost this childlike curiosity, this interest in learning and not assuming you know it and asking why obsessively. And it's okay if asking why is done in the right spirit. So why becomes your powerful friend, and asking the companions to why, like why not and what if. So if you're internal consultant helping your leaders get sensitized to asking the question why, I would suggest using these tips to help leaders move forward. Next slide, Jamie. So along with why, I want to mention that tone really matters. So people sense this spirit in which why is being asked intuitively. If leaders aren't asking why from a place of curiosity, and I just want to understand, which sometimes helps to bring a question with that, I'm asking this question because I want to understand. It helps set the stage for the listener to respond to you in a way that's not out of fear. Of those I've worked with, organizational fear is, I would say, I don't know if you guys will agree with me or not, but it's far more deep and widespread than leaders want to admit, and that most leaders even understand. It comes in all shapes and forms. And the main problem with fear is once you have that in the agency, people won't tell the truth. And I don't mean that they'll lie, but they'll withhold, they'll kind of couch down, and they won't answer directly. And leaders won't have the information they need to make a good decision. You know, for those of you familiar with W. Edward Deming's book, Out of the Crisis, it's an excellent book if you aren't familiar with it. He identifies these 14 management points. And the number 8 point is you have to drive fear out of the organization. So if you think that you have no fear, I would challenge you to start having some good heart-to-heart conversations with people and ask the degree in which they feel comfortable telling leaders there is a problem. I think that, as leaders, coaching on how to establish a safe environment to want to tell the leaders that there's a problem in order to get to the next step, which in my mind is, actually solving the problem, right? So organizational-wide fear is really prevalent, and it is one of the first steps to take if you want to make traction in developing a PMQI organization. Driving out that fear, I believe, happens when leaders are engaged, when leaders are involved. It doesn't happen when a leader goes out and tells the PMQI consultant or the council or a team given the mission to drive out fear. That's not going to make it work. It has to be supported by leaders declaring a ban on fear and following through. And the minute that a leader says, there's no fear here, and then when somebody comes in and they start to share the truth, and that leader responds in a negative way, hey, game over. I mean, you've gone back to square one, and it's probably gone back to square one minus one. So fear is really important thing to pay attention to. When I go into agencies, and this is going to sound funny, but I can smell it, I can hear it, and I can practically taste fear when I'm in an agency.
Because that wasn't my thing.
Somebody chatting. How's it going? I'm ready for the next slide, Jamie. So here's the other thing that everyone in the organization needs to embrace. As close as to the beginning of your journey as possible. So people are not an organization's problem. And by and large, I believe people come to work in the morning and they want to do a good job. They want to serve. They want to help customers. And they are not the problem. And yet, every time there's a problem, what's the first thing you hear? It's a name associated with the problem, right? And I have found that the problem is 99.99% of the time that it's the work systems and processes are not quite what they need to be. They allow the problem to occur, and they don't allow people to shine. It's the way the systems are built that's the problem. And the good news is you can't change people, but you can change work systems and processes. And I have found it very liberating a perspective to finally embrace that people are hardly ever the problem, that work systems and processes are the issue. And what that means is you have to get this army of people, if you will, in an organization who are extremely sophisticated and savvy with process management and measurement and ownership. And you have to have this army of people that are minding the store, if you will, and know how to detect systems and process problems, and they can do something about that. They're empowered. And what I would like to suggest is that it's long overdue time to shift the manager's role, and especially, I believe, at the middle manager's role, from being one of managing people, if you will, to start managing processes and building up their proficiency as quickly as possible on what managing processes means. And fear is going to get driven out of an organization real quickly if you adopt this belief that the problem is not the people, it's the work systems and processes. Next slide, Jamie. So another leadership mindset, and this one that comes with humility, is respect. And I respect comes in many forms. One form of respect is having work systems and processes, as I mentioned, that allows people to shine. It's not just how we talk to people or if we do or don't talk behind someone's back. It's far deeper than that. I believe it's far easier to fix than that. It's a matter of admitting and finally grasping that people who do the work are the experts. And leadership, they're the experts who set strategy and vision. And the people who do the work are the experts in the tactical day-to-day, step-by-step process by which they do their work. And no leader should go in and tell someone what to do and how to do it. No way. I mean, it should be people doing the work determining the how after leaders set the what. And so leaders need to get in and set the direction. And that's when the workforce comes alive and they're excited to come to work in the morning, and the workforce and leadership meld together and become excellent. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to kind of move into this realm of visual management. And what I see is this one is the least applied as I visit a lot of agencies. Next slide. So in visual management, next slide, Jamie. There we go. I think of visual management in these 4 parts. One is to allow people to know what they should be doing, and then when they should be doing it, and how they should be doing it. And that comes in the form of these, what I call visual job aids, or standard work forms. And the other is to communicate status of performance, right? So how many are coming in? How many are going out? How fast are we working? What should we be doing? And kind of where should we actually be at? What's our target? And measure ourselves against that known target. And that is how we come up with a gap, right? So solving our problems, there's often a gap between where we are and where we want to be. And this visual management concept is a very good tool to also communicate about abnormalities. You need to know what's not normal and what is normal so that you can take action and have the ability to make these problems visible. Next slide, please. So, well, this one really should have been done in a PowerPoint push where so these are overlapping each other, but in the slide itself, this is a couple of rules to think about. And if you don't have these in place, you may want to consider the adoption of these to become an effective PMQI organization. And those are, in a PMQI organization, visual management reigns supreme, and that there's no guessing about performance. It's very, very transparent. Next slide, please. So when I think about this in keeping score, and I, the analogy I'm going to use is a sporting event, right? So it's interesting that there's a real-time scoreboard that everyone's focused on and that communicates to the players, to the audience, to the coaches, exactly what's going on and how much time is left, who's winning, what the penalty areas are, and that kind of thing as shown here in this picture. But a lot of this information, and it's simple, it's very little data being displayed, but it's very helpful. And so I would say that most leaders don't know their true score. And at the executive leadership level, most executives or leaders know how they are doing financially at the agency, and I think that's about it a lot of the time. They may know one element of operations. If they're like a deputy director of a division or director of a division, they know their divisional area, and they may know a little bit about customer satisfaction, but I would say most of them, they're really in the dark about what's going on a day-to-day basis. And I'm not suggesting that leaders need to get into the weeds, but there needs to be a level of, and I'm going to use the acronym KPI, Key Performance Indicators, that are balanced and show the full range of truth within the organization, and that it not be just about the financial status of the agency. So the next slides that I'm going to share, I'm going to keep using that KPI, Key Performance Indicators, performance measures, whatever you want to call them, but I'm going to call them throughout this presentation KPIs. Next slide, please. So if you think about it this way, I use leadership and the value stream, which is a whole series of actions that you take in order to deliver value to the customer, right? And there's this function or department level of KPIs that people focus on. So every step of the way, we should be able to answer the question, how are we doing? Not just financially, but operationally, how are we doing? With anything relevant to the organization. There could be a very significant safety problem, or maybe it's a morale problem, or a compliance problem, right? That's where, wherever those problems are, that's where those KPIs focus should be. And you know, this is just a rule of thumb that I like to mention here, is that, you know, 2 to 5 KPIs on a dashboard to give a quick glance of performance, and then have drill down KPIs that kind of tell the details behind those key KPIs is very, very helpful. Next slide, please. So here's an example that I kind of wanted to show a picture. This is an example at an executive leadership board when I was at Henry County Health Department in Ohio. And I'm going to show you some examples at all 3 levels, and this one's just the leadership executive level. But in this board, on the left, you can see they've got it into these pillars. There's the people pillars. Are we hiring and retaining qualified staff? There's this financial pillar. Do we maintain funding, you know, to provide essential public health services, of course. And then, of course, you can see the quality pillar. Are we providing safe, effective, and efficient services? The service pillar, are we providing consistent, courteous, respectful, and timely service to our customers? Safety, are we providing the safe environment, and so on. And this is posted in their lobby. And it's where every single visitor that comes in can see this. And it was at the top of every stairs and in every break room. And it's posted on the agency website. It's very, very transparent so that everybody, stakeholders, partners, staff, everybody knows the score. It's a very effective use of visuals, and it's very indicative of PMQI thinking. Next slide, please. So this is a value stream that has various KPIs where the teams gather to do daily management, right? These are examples from Jessamine County. And it's regarding the type of visits in the upper right corner, and then random testing results in the lower left corner, and if patients kept their appointments to the right. And at that value stream level, there are many, many value streams. And these are physical stand-up areas where you conduct daily, weekly management, or in the case of executive leaders, I would recommend monthly management, where leadership physically goes to the areas to look at what the results are. And you can do this on a computer. I mean, I've seen lots of folks in my fab site visits, you know, who present information about doing this all on a computer or doing it virtually, but it's just not nearly as effective as doing these reviews in person. So then let me go to the next slide to kind of talk about this function department level. And this is one team's example about inspections completed, actual versus target, right? You're tracking what the output or the production is. And every single level of the agency needs a dashboard that answers the question, how are we doing? So that any leader can go into any area at any time and know more or less what's going on and how problems are being solved. Next slide. So in this PMQI organization, there's no guessing about abnormalities. Next slide. So establishing a clear criteria so that people can tell if something's not performing as it should. I can look at this visually very quickly. All leaders should be leading the organization so everyone has a strong visual management, and that philosophically, it's the way that keeps you from hiding from the facts, right? So all of this is interconnected. You want this fact-based decision-making and have to make problems visible so that you can also have performance visible. Next slide. So in this PMQI organization, there's also no guessing about who's doing what where and when or how. And one of the things that I don't see near enough in organizations are what I would call work boards. Who's doing what, how are they doing, and this can take all kinds of forms and visuals, and it's what your culture will handle and take, but this, you make it your own when you're starting to create these work boards. So let me go to the next slide, Jamie, back to my overarching here slide about talking about Gemba management, the go and see where the work is being done. What I've seen is leaders getting out of their offices and they're starting to go to the Gemba on a regular basis, where the work's happening. And for those on the webinar that are a little older, this is very different from the term that used to be called managing by walking around. This Gemba walk it's a very intentional, purposeful. They're usually key points that you're hoping to achieve when you go to the Gemba. And I'd like to share some of those with you here on the next couple slides. So let's go to the next one, Jamie. First of all, there's a way to go to the Gemba. So regardless of the reason, there's a way you approach it. And one is to remember that you're going to go and see, right? So you want to see those visual workboards. You want to see performance. And you're going to ask as a leader, why? And as always, show respect, right, to the employee. And this is where the workforce and leadership, as I mentioned earlier, they start bonding in this very powerful way. Leaders need to know what's going on and what the progress is and where the problems are. And the only way to do that is for them to become a little more accessible, friendly, and trustworthy for the frontline staff to be able to share those things. Next slide. So when you go to the work site as a leader, there's basically 3 different ways I view how Gemba walks occur and why they occur. And the first one, and this is really intended to be a slide where the left quadrant comes on first and then the middle quadrant comes on second and the last quadrant. So and when I refer to the first one, it's that left quadrant here with all the people. This is what I call daily management. Daily management is going to the work area if you're a supervisor, and maybe a couple of areas within a division if you happen to be a director. And if you're an executive or a leader, you're probably going to the same physical area that a director is going. And that's to look at those KPIs. What's the progress? And hear what the problems are. And make sure that the teams are moving forward on solving gaps that possibly exist. So it's modeling the behavior and asking questions. And the actual problem solving occurs offline. And the coaching occurs offline. And it's a matter of learning what's going on and seeing whether or not progress is being made. And then as a leader, you have to figure out, if not, why not, and what to do about it. So that's regular daily management, and weekly for director level and monthly for executive leadership. And so now I'm going to focus in that middle section. This is kind of what I call getting out of your office as a leader the minute that there's a problem. So for those of you already skilled with PMQI, you've probably already adopted the habit of when you're in a conference room or in a meeting and somebody says something like, there's an issue here, and we'll say, well, let's go and see. And people will be like, well, we're in the middle of a meeting, and yeah, well, let's go and see what the problem is. And that's part of your meeting management as leaders and middle managers is let's go and see. What you want to make sure that you get is the people in the know, the people doing the work, and engage early and get to the problem solving as fast as possible when there's a problem to be solved. Now this type of Gemba, I consider that to be reactive. And there's a problem, we need to solve it, so let's be very reactive about it. And now the right-hand corner of this slide, that's the last one, and it's going on a regular basis for no particular reason other than to find out what people are working on, what they're doing, and if they're staying true to the priorities of the agency. And of course, I think getting a lot of information as a leader that helps you as a leader make better decisions. And it helps you kind of better understand what development needs are needed in staff. And sometimes it's a matter of staff being stuck and they haven't been able to get good help in getting them unstuck, and there's some sort of obstacle in the way. And a senior leader can remove obstacles better than anyone in the organization. And I believe leaders are obligated to clear their schedules to allow this to happen. And it's key to being a good PMQI leader. Next slide, please. So this is another one of those eyesore slides, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this table, but I do want to say that this provides detail of the levels of Gemba walks, the purpose, the suggested frequency, the link, etc. I find that it's very useful, and it summarizes for leaders the role and the importance of Gemba walks. Next slide. So the other thing that I want to mention on these Gemba walks is until you start doing them on a regular basis, it's hard to really understand the power of them. But there's a lot of misunderstandings that get surfaced and corrected while you're out there talking to the workforce. And you'll notice a lot of new needs that come up, and they are also a great way to make sure that the organization's vision is being reinforced. No humility, a lot of curiosity, and tons of respect needs to be shown. So next slide, please. So here's your action plan. If you're a leader on the call, or if you're an internal improvement person, where your job is to talk to your leadership about this, go to your team and have them develop 2 to 5 KPIs. I believe no more than 5, and as I mentioned, you can have those drill down but what are the key measures that show the degree of success that the team's having, and determine what the targets are. Just do it so people know how to keep score and what their score is. And remove fear from the equation. Approach all of this as kind of a matter of fact and unemotional. It doesn't matter how you got somewhere other than not wanting to repeat that, right? It matters where you're at and where you want to go. And I would recommend next instituting regular Gemba walks in every area of the organization. I recommend also highly, don't roll this out all at once, and that you don't roll out visual management all at once. You need to pilot it in one or two areas, let them work out the bugs in those areas, and it takes every culture, I believe, a little different approach, as I mentioned earlier. It takes a while to get these working really smoothly, and once you have an example, you have a best practice that others can follow, and then roll it out in phases. I see far too much where an organization will have this mandate that everyone has to put a visual board up, and it just never works. It's just not successful. And the last item is to have your teams create these written standard work and job aids for all the key processes. And it takes a lot of work, but it's extremely valuable. Those 4 things will get you miles ahead of where you are now. Next slide, please. So in closing, I think that the question that really came to mind at the very beginning when I was talking with ASTO and putting this together and you as folks brought to their attention is, what can lower level leaders within the organization do to help drive leadership staff to make a more proactive approach to PMQI management? And I'm going to circle this conversation all the way back to the beginning about it starts with the conversation with leaders. Where do they want to go? And what environment do they want to create? And let's define true north. Where are we now? And how do people behave now? And then what's our gap? And what causes them to behave this way? And what do we need to do about it? Next slide. So with that, I've included a list of some fantastic books if you're interested in learning a little more. I would suggest starting out with Out of the Crisis and then The Simple Leader. But I also want to mention ASTO has a great resource called Performance Management Leadership Guide, and it's located on their website. So with that, I'll go ahead and close out and open things up for questions. We don't have a lot of time left. I apologize for taking up so much time. But with that, let's see where we want to go.
Thank you so much, Susan. That was some extremely helpful information. I think we all got some great tips and strategies. But I want to open it up to folks on the line. Feel free to unmute your line if you would like to ask Susan a question, or you can also use the chat box if you have any questions for her.
Thank you, Megan, for the kind words.
Hearing silence and not seeing in the chat box. And thank you so much, Susan. I really, really appreciate it. Again, we're just so excited to put this information out there. Again, you provided so many great tips and tools for folks to use, and I think it was all very, very valuable information. And as folks can see on the screen, Susan provided her contact information, and I'm sure she'd be more than happy to answer any questions offline.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Susan. And for folks on the line, I know we didn't get to touch on the ASTO's performance dashboard indicators, and I do sincerely apologize. However, I will share with you, I'll quickly go through these slides just so you see these are on the slide deck and will be included in the in the slide deck. And with that, we'll have, if you have questions or want additional information in that, of course, can reach out to ask you about that. And we have, seeing 2 minutes left, so any last minute questions from folks on the line for Susan? And feel free to use the chat box or unmute your line. Susan, I have a quick question for you, actually, hearing none from others. But do you have any specific trainings around QI and performance management that you think are more appropriate for leaders?
I think that leadership does have a little different track than middle managers or line staff about these kinds of issues around core values and philosophy and ways to manage processes that are really tied to the Lean Six Sigma model. And so I think locally, wherever you're located, universities offer this, as well as external consultants. But it is a special track for them to get outside the normal leadership box that traditionally they have been in. But I can't name any right off the top of my head. But I do know that geographically in areas that scope of leadership training tends to be at your local middle-level colleges or universities in this track of Lean Six Sigma.
Great, thank you. And yeah, just a quick reminder for folks too about the NNPHI FIT training with the leadership track. I know there are some specific presentations on performance management and leadership, and actually ASTO will be presenting with a leader from the Vermont Health Department on performance management and measurement. So I encourage you all, if you're attending, to check out that presentation. And again, I want to say thank you again to Susan for joining us, and thank you all for joining as well. And don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions, comments, feedback, anything for our own continuous quality improvement as well. So with that, I'll conclude this quarter's Performance Management and Quality Improvement Peer Network. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you, everyone.
And thank you again, Susan.
Thank you. Please stand.